Looking at the admission notice in my hand, I nearly burst into tears. No one knew that I had been reborn. At the very last second, I had changed my preference to a technical school in the remote Northwest. Even my teacher was surprised. "Didn't you say your fiancé was staying here at the university?" she asked. "If you study somewhere that far away, will he wait for you?" At the mention of Julian Vance, an image of him in his youth flashed through my mind. Tall, sturdy, and handsome. To everyone else, I was the one punching above my weight. He was ambitious, strikingly good-looking, and already a military officer. If it weren't for a childhood betrothal, I wouldn't have even had the right to stand beside him. I smiled and replied clearly, "Ma'am, people prefer free love these days. An arrangement made when we were kids is just a remnant of an old-fashioned system. It's not something I can accept anymore." Perhaps surprised by my sudden enlightenment, the teacher patted my shoulder with an approving gaze. Leaving the school, I blended into the crowd and walked slowly home. In my past life, I never even made it to college. My wedding to Julian was only days away, and shortly after, we had children. My education was shelved forever. Not long after staying at the university, Julian chose to enlist, and from then on, we lived in two different worlds. Out there, he climbed the ranks step by step. Wherever he was stationed, Sarah Miller and her daughter moved there too. Meanwhile, I was trapped in a tiny corner of the world, serving my parents-in-law and raising children day after day. I watched my children go from babbling toddlers who clung to me to distant strangers who slowly drifted toward Julian. Later, I only found out my son had married Sarah's daughter after the wedding was over. I only happened to see the wedding photos through an old friend. In those pictures, as my son and his bride served tea, Julian sat beside Sarah, the two of them smiling with such intimacy it was an eyesore. After that, my son urged me to divorce more than once. "Mom," he'd say, "Dad has suffered his whole life. If it wasn't for you, he would have been with my mother-in-law a long time ago. No matter how I look at it, you aren't a match for him. Why won't you just let go?" My daughter-in-law wouldn't even deign to meet me once. But what could I do? I was bitter. I was bitter because I had stayed up night after night caring for my parents-in-law when they were bedridden, while he was out enjoying himself with his mistress. I was bitter because when my child had a high fever in the middle of the night, I ran 3 miles barefoot to the doctor while he was busy tutoring someone else's daughter. And I was bitter most of all because I gave my entire life for that home, yet he, the kids, and everyone else said I was never good enough for him. They blamed me for not letting go. So I stubbornly held on. The years of hardship left my face lined with wrinkles, my appearance haggard and old. I would rather die than let them be together. As for what happened after I died, I didn't have the strength to care anymore. Finally, I died after another one of my son's lectures on divorce. He talked for ages, and seeing my silence, he stormed out in a rage. He didn't know that before the door even clicked shut, I had a massive heart attack. I called out to him, but he didn't turn back. He just slammed the door. In that moment, I felt a wave of ultimate regret. Why did I give birth to him? Why did I lose my entire life for him? But it's okay. I've been reborn. I'm back to the time before I married Julian. There is still time. When I got home, I carefully hid the admission notice and started cooking. This 2-bedroom apartment belonged to the unit where Julian worked. While waiting for the rice to cook, I went to the wall calendar in the living room. I found my orientation date for next month and circled it in red. I stared at that marked number, my heart full of anticipation. Soon, very soon, I would be free. Just as I finished cooking, Julian returned. As expected, Sarah Miller was trailing behind him with her daughter. Sarah gave a soft smile. "I'm bothering you again, Grace. I'm so sorry." Sarah had fair, smooth skin, an oval face, and wore a bright red coat that made her look indescribably charming. The little girl following her seemed used to this. Seeing that dinner was ready, she cheered and ran to dish out the rice. 1 bowl for herself, 1 for Julian, and 1 for Sarah. There was nothing for me. By the time I walked out of the kitchen, the 3 of them were sitting happily at the table, chatting and eating like a real family. But as soon as they brought the chopsticks to their mouths, all 3 of them spat the food out simultaneously. "Mommy, Mommy, it's so salty," the little girl cried. I leaned against the kitchen doorframe, watching Julian Vance rush to pour a bowl of soup for the 2 of them, only for the soup to be even saltier. In the end, Sarah Miller left in tears, sobbing as she turned back to Julian before walking out. I don't think Grace likes me being here, she said. I won't come around anymore. Julian saw them to the door and returned with a heavy frown. I ignored him and quietly went back into the kitchen to cook a fresh meal for myself. He watched me, finally unable to contain himself. You did that on purpose, didn't you? When I remained silent, he spoke up again, his voice sounding like he was trying to justify his actions. Before her husband was killed in action, he asked me to look after them. You're a great cook, and the girl loves your food. No, was all I said. Julian stared at me for a long time before sighing, appearing to concede. If you don't like it, I won't invite them over for dinner anymore. 4 days later, after Julian left the house, I pulled out my suitcase. I was preparing to head back to my hometown in a few days. Since he and I had been betrothed since childhood, complete with the exchange of family keepsakes and birth charts, a proper breakup required a formal cancellation in front of the village elders to avoid any messy complications later on. As I was packing, I came across the duvet covers and pillowcases I had spent years secretly embroidering. After thinking it over, I stuffed all the linens and a pair of newly sewn shoes into a large bag and took them to the pawn shop at the end of the street. Those years of painstaking needlework only netted me $30. It wasn't much, but at a university, every cent counts toward food and living expenses. Every little bit saved was a bit of freedom earned. Back at home, I took a pen and marked a giant X on the calendar. Only 20 days left. Just 20 more days, and I could leave this place and start my new life. Julian came home very late. The dinner I had cooked sat untouched on the table. I already ate at the university, he explained casually, as if it were of no importance. But the light, white tea scent of her perfume clinging to him told me otherwise. He had eaten, all right, but with Sarah Miller and her daughter. Knowing that eating at home would irritate me, he had simply taken them out and returned afterward. I quietly cleared the dishes and went to my room. The space was crammed with my high school books and old exam papers. There wasn't enough room, so some spilled out into the living room. I tied my books into bundles with rope, planning to finish clearing the ones in the living room tomorrow after Julian left. Since I was leaving soon, there was no point in keeping any of this. As I was tidying up, I heard a knock. I knew it was Julian. He had always been polite to a fault with me, never entering my room without permission. What is it? I asked coldly, not wanting him to see that I was packing. There was a long silence from the other side of the door before his voice finally drifted in. I'm writing the marriage application. I'm setting the date for the 9th of next month. Is that okay with you? The 9th of next month was the exact day I had married him in my previous life. I looked at my packed bags and replied softly, marriage is a big deal. I want to go back home tomorrow to ask my elder's opinion first. Another long silence stretched outside the door. Finally, I heard his footsteps walking away. I let out a breath of relief and leaned back against the headboard. In reality, with his current rank, he didn't even need family permission to file a marriage application. Besides, my parents had died young. Because of our childhood betrothal, I had been taken in and raised by his family. In the eyes of outsiders, I had belonged to the Vance family for a long time. This application was a mere formality. Julian was handsome, had a stable career, and treated me well enough. Anyone could see that my heart had long been set on him, and that I owed the Vances a great debt. But in my last life, I used my entire existence to pay that debt. In this life, I owe them nothing. This time, I'm taking my own path, a path without Julian Vance. The next morning, I was surprised to find that Julian had prepared breakfast. 8 treasure porridge and fried eggs, my favorites. In the last 3 years, I had rarely seen him do anything like this. I sat down in the kitchen, the silence broken only by the slight clinking of my spoon against the bowl. Suddenly, Julian looked up. I'll put in for some leave and go back home with you. I froze and instinctively shook my head. I'll drive you, he said, frowning at me. It's not safe to go alone. I was still searching for an excuse to refuse when a little girl came running through the door. Daddy, she cried. She had 2 pink bows tied in her hair and threw herself straight into Julian's arms. Nia, what are you doing here? Where's your mom? He reflexively turned to look toward the door. The little girl looked up, her large, round eyes watching me cautiously. Mommy said Auntie doesn't like her, so she was scared to come in. I looked at the girl in silence. This was the person who, in my previous life, had married my son, but never once appeared before me. Even at 3 years old, her features were already delicate and beautiful. It was no wonder that even though she was 4 years older than my son, he had always worshipped her and her mother like goddesses. It didn't take a genius to know that Julian Vance would hurry off with Nia. The moment the little girl mentioned that Sarah Miller wasn't feeling well, he didn't say a single word to me. He just picked the child up and rushed out immediately. I let out a dry laugh. Actually, that worked out perfectly. I didn't have to scramble for an excuse to head back to my hometown alone anymore. I picked up a pen, walked over to the wall calendar, and drew a large X over today's date. 19 days left. I quickly cleared the rest of the books from my room, gathered the notebooks and exam papers from the living room, and tied them into neat bundles. After selling everything, I set off for the countryside with $13 in my pocket. Returning this time was about one thing: officially breaking my engagement to Julian. His parents had always treated me well, but convincing them to agree to call off the wedding wasn't as hard as one might think. All I had to say was that Julian was on a fast track to a major promotion, and that he and I were no longer a good match. The countryside was quiet and still. In the yard, a small fire flickered, casting dancing shadows while mosquitoes buzzed in the air. I sat by the base of a dirt wall, pressing a wooden board over tobacco leaves and carefully slicing them into thin ribbons with a knife. My aunt and uncle sat on the doorstep, silent for a long time. Finally, they let out a heavy sigh and tried to reason with me. "Honey, even if he has someone else in his heart, you two have a formal betrothal. If he dares not to marry you, your uncle here will give him a piece of his mind. Your parents are gone, and they trusted us to look after you before they passed. If you do this, you'll be all alone." Seeing that I wouldn't budge, they glanced at each other and shook their heads in helplessness. "Why do you have to be so stubborn? Fine, let's go see the village captain." I followed them silently to the village headquarters. We obtained the official confirmation to dissolve the engagement, and the betrothal keepsakes from years ago were returned. Standing before the village elders, as I took the tokens back, I let out a soft sigh of relief. I helped my aunt and uncle back to the house. I understood they only wanted what was best for me. After all, a man like Julian Vance was a prize in everyone's eyes. Even his own parents couldn't fathom why I was so determined to call it off. But I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't tell them that I had suffered enough in my past life, only for my only son to fall in love with Sarah Miller's daughter, and for them to become a happy family while I spent my life in isolation. The engagement was finally over. My aunt and uncle patted my hand gently. "From now on, you're just like our own daughter." I didn't tell them about my plan to study in the Northwest, but I stayed in the village for another 2 weeks. When it was time to leave, they walked me all the way to the edge of town, constantly nagging me. "Remember, this is your home. You must come back and visit us often. Do you hear?" It wasn't until I reached the bus station to buy my ticket that I found $200 tucked into my pocket. They must have slipped it in without me noticing. Standing there, I couldn't hold back my tears. As soon as I got back to the apartment, the first thing I did was take a red pen and mark 15 large X's on the calendar. 4 days left, only 4 more days. I was just about to carry my luggage into my room when I heard the door open. Julian had returned from work, but he wasn't alone. Sarah and Nia were with him. "You're back," he said, looking a bit surprised to see me. Sarah simply gave me a slight nod, and then, quite naturally, walked straight into my bedroom. I frowned as she closed the door behind her, as if it were her own room. All the things I had kept in there were now piled haphazardly in the living room. I turned to look at Julian. He paused for a moment as if just remembering something, then explained. "Oh, there was a heavy rain a few days ago and Sarah's roof started leaking. She's staying here for a couple of days. Since you weren't home and didn't have many belongings, I let her use your room for now." He hadn't even bothered to ask me. He just moved my things out to make room for someone else. He watched my reaction, paused, and then continued. "Anyway, just move your stuff into my room for now. You can stay in there with me." He opened his bedroom door as he spoke. "By the way, did you reorganize? Where are all your books and papers?" I looked at the small bag he had tossed onto his bedside table and bit my lip. It made sense. This was his house, after all. Whatever he did with it was none of my business. I replied indifferently. "The college entrance exams are over. Keeping those books was useless, so I sold them all." Julian's brow furrowed. "Even if the exams are over, Those books could still be useful later. Why would you just sell them? I didn't answer. Seeing my silence, he didn't push further. He just shifted the topic. So, what did the folks back home say? He naturally reached out to take the luggage from my hands. I stiffened for a second but kept my composure. I found a specialist to look at the dates, and that day isn't auspicious. We should discuss it later. This was the excuse my aunt, uncle, and I had agreed upon, to stall for a few days until I left, then tell him the truth. Julian didn't seem to suspect a thing. He just gave a slight nod and muttered, "I guess we'll have to pick another day then." He turned to leave the room, telling me to get some rest while he went to cook dinner. I watched his retreating back, then lowered my eyes to the desk. By the window, the marriage application was already filled out, with only the date left blank. I froze for a moment before pulling my gaze away, intending to go out and give him a hand. But just then, a soft conversation drifted from outside. A man's deep murmur, a woman's gentle tone, and a child's bright, chirpy voice. The three of them sounded like a real family. I sat back down in my chair silently. After all, I had already canceled the engagement. Living in the same house was no longer appropriate, let alone sharing a room. But with only 4 days left, I couldn't find a suitable rental immediately. After thinking for a while, I decided that after dinner, I would simply sleep on the floor in the living room. After a long day of traveling, I intended to go to bed early, but Sarah Miller was full of energy. She wore a white dress and began dancing right there in the living room, even spreading out a mat to do stretching exercises. On top of that, Nia was running back and forth through the house. Julian even let her use his bed as a trampoline, jumping up and down until I finally had to make an excuse to go get some water. I grabbed my wash basin and stepped out of the house. Once outside, I took a deep breath. "Oh, Grace, when did you get back? Didn't you say you were visiting your in-laws?" Mrs. Flower, the neighbor, called out when she saw me carrying my basin. "I just stayed for a few days. I got back today," I replied. Mrs. Flower was a close neighbor. Her husband worked as an accountant at the coal mine, and they were quite well off. Every time she made fried cakes or anything delicious, she always brought a portion for me. So we were on good terms. She looked at me, seemingly about to say something, but she glanced behind me and quickly pulled me a few steps further away. When we reached the well, she poked my forehead hard, her voice full of regret. "You really are a fool. What's so good about that woman? Her husband is dead, yet she still struts around everywhere. Why on earth did you let someone like that into your home? Oh, Grace, you're just too young and naive. Your Julian is the kind of man other women drool over, and here you are, inviting trouble into your own house. Are you crazy?" She went on a long rant, and that was when I found out the truth. It turned out that when Julian Vance brought Sarah and her daughter here, he told everyone it had been my idea. He claimed I felt sorry for them because their roof leaked, and that, before I left for the countryside, I had asked him to bring them here to stay. I curled my lip in a cold smirk. Clearly, he was afraid of being criticized, so he used me as a shield. But since I was leaving soon, I didn't want to waste energy arguing. I just gave a faint smile and said nothing. On the way back, Mrs. Flower warned me repeatedly not to let this threat stay too long, and told me to let her know if I needed help. I knew she was a bit curious to see the drama unfold, but she was still a good person at heart. When I got home, the living room was empty. I took my clothes to the bathroom, but as soon as I stepped inside, I froze. Suddenly, the space was filled with women's toiletries that didn't belong to me. The soap and washcloth I usually used had been tossed into a corner, right next to the trash can. Their original spot had been replaced by 2 towels, one large, one small, along with hair oils and shampoos. Right then, a hard shove to my shoulder sent me stumbling, and my forehead hit the doorframe. "Ouch. Out of the way, Grace. Nia really has to go. Do you mind giving us some space?" Sarah Miller shoved past me, carrying the girl, and casually sat her down on the potty. Once finished, she looked up at me, her voice soft and sweet. "Grace, please move out of the way. You're blocking my path." Her tone was delicate, but her eyes were brimming with triumph and contempt. Unfortunately for her, I didn't move. "Apologize," I said coldly. Sarah looked stunned, likely not expecting me to take that tone. But she had a child who was quite the actress. Nia already disliked me, and seeing the tension between me and her mother, she lunged forward, gave me a hard push, and wailed at the top of her lungs, "You're mean. You're mean. You're bullying my mommy. You're a monster." Hearing the crying, Julian Vance came rushing out of the room. What happened? Why is she crying? He hurriedly scooped the girl up to comfort her. Sarah's eyes turned red, and her voice was shaky. Julian, it's my fault. Nia had an emergency, and Grace happened to be in the bathroom. I just asked her to step aside for a second, and then... Julian turned to me with a look of disapproval. Though he didn't say anything, he pulled Nia into his arms and soothed her gently. Don't cry, don't cry. Let Daddy talk to your aunt. We'll ask her to apologize to you, okay? Seeing that the girl still hadn't stopped, he carried her into the room, saying he'd get her some candy. Sarah shot me a look that was both smug and mocking before following him inside. As the child's sobbing faded, my face remained expressionless. I calmly finished washing up, gathered my things, and put them back in my basin. By the time I returned to the bedroom, Sarah had already taken the child elsewhere. A box of colorful candies sat on the nightstand, obviously meant for children. When Julian saw me enter, his movements stopped. Sit down. From his expression, I knew exactly what was coming. It would be a lecture on loving children, not holding grudges against a toddler, and how I should be the one to apologize to Nia. I didn't refuse. I sat down as he asked. Then, I picked up a piece of tissue, lightly touched the wound on my forehead to soak up the blood, and held the paper out in front of him. On the white tissue, the red blood stain was unmistakable. Julian opened his mouth to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. His face turned pale and then flushed, looking incredibly awkward. I stood up, grabbed my blanket and pillow, and headed for the door. I'm sleeping in the living room tonight? Wait, he cried, hurriedly grabbing my wrist. There's a bed and blankets in the room. What are you going out there for? Thinking I was just angry about what had happened, he sighed and pulled me back toward the chair. Nia is just a child, and Sarah didn't mean any harm. You're an adult. Don't take it out on a kid. They are guests. I know you don't like Sarah, but she hasn't had an easy life. Don't be so petty, okay? I let out a cold, sharp laugh. So that's why you brought them here and told everyone it was my idea? Julian's breath hitched. He opened his mouth, but not a single word came out. I sneered. It was obvious. No matter how many beautiful words he used, deep down, he couldn't hide his guilt and his pathetic calculations from himself. Out of respect for his parents, I didn't want to ruin his career, but this was my absolute limit. That night, Julian spread a blanket and slept on the living room floor. Early the next morning, I got up before dawn and packed all my belongings, planning to find a guest house first and come back for my luggage later. As soon as I opened the door, I saw that Julian had already finished making breakfast. Nia caught sight of me and let out a cold huff, pulling the plates of food toward herself and Sarah. Julian brought out a plate of fried eggs and smiled when he saw me. You're up. Come here, I made these eggs for you. Seeing the behavior of Nia and Sarah, he gave a forced, awkward laugh. Come on, Nia, share some with your aunt. I didn't even bother to respond. I simply turned and walked out of the house. The nearest guest house was only a block away. I rented the cheapest room, $21 for 3 days. After paying the deposit, I stopped by a breakfast stall on the way back to buy some steamed buns and fried dough sticks. But when I got home, I stood frozen in shock. My luggage had been ransacked, and my belongings were scattered everywhere. Even worse, my admission notice had been torn out by Nia and was sitting on the table, being folded into paper airplanes. My head felt like it was going to explode. What are you doing? I screamed, lunging forward to snatch the notice out of the girl's hands. Startled by my outburst, Nia fell from the table to the floor. Her ear-piercing wails brought Sarah Miller rushing out of the other room in a panic. Grace, what are you doing? Who gave you the right to bully Nia? She shoved me hard and scooped the child up, coddling her with exaggerated heartbreak. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My hands trembled as I smoothed out the admission notice, checking every single word. I'm bullying her? Didn't you see what your daughter just did? Who gave you people the right to touch my things? Get out. Get out of here right now. Sarah stood up with the child in her arms and looked at me coldly, her voice dripping with mockery. Humph. You aren't even married to Julian yet. What right do you have to kick me out? She started toward the door but paused at the threshold to look back at me, her eyes full of disdain. Even if you do marry him, you'll never win against me. Slam! The door shook as she stormed out. Every time Julian wasn't around, Sarah showed her true colors. In the past, I had been insecure and weak. Sarah was beautiful, had a prestigious job, and was the star of the performing arts troupe. I always felt like I couldn't compare to her. But after living an entire lifetime, I finally understood. Why on earth should I compare myself to her? In Julian Vance's heart, Sarah was obviously more important than me. But was he all I had in this life? I could go to college. I could serve my country. I could step out and see the vast world, while this muddy swamp was only holding me back. After finishing my packing, I took the red pen and drew another giant X on the calendar. Only 3 days left. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and headed straight to the guest house. When I first woke up in this life, I thought about going to Sarah's workplace to make a scene. She had ruined my entire life, and I felt like I was choking on my own rage. But what would that accomplish? As long as Julian was there, even if Sarah lost her job, he would support her forever. To her, it wouldn't be a devastating blow. As long as I still cared for the parents who raised me, and as long as I didn't want to personally destroy Julian's career, Sarah would always hold the winning hand. Ultimately, the problem was the man himself. Sarah's husband had plenty of comrades. Why was no one else looking after them? Why was Julian the only one acting as Naya's daddy? Huss. Once at the guest house, I reorganized my bags and took out a sheet of paper to write Julian a farewell letter. Putting aside the fact that he was always absent after our marriage and his lifelong entanglement with Sarah, he had provided for me during my 3 years of high school and occasionally helped me with my homework. For that alone, I owed him a clear explanation. In the letter, I wrote that I had gone home to cancel the engagement and that I had been accepted into a different university. From now on, our paths would diverge, and we would have nothing more to do with each other. I was halfway through when there was a knock at the door. Thinking it was the guest house staff, I opened it. To my surprise, it was Julian Vance. He was covered in dust, looking like he had been running around searching for a long time. The moment he saw me, he let out a massive sigh of relief. As if a heavy weight had finally been lifted, he panted, "I finally found you. You're safe. That's all that matters. You're safe." I remained silent, expecting him to open his mouth and scold me. But he didn't. "All right, don't be angry anymore. Come home with me." Julian Vance walked straight into the room and began helping me pack my things. I quickly shoved some notebooks over the half-finished letter I was writing. However, his eyes landed on the silver bracelet tucked in my luggage. His expression shifted instantly, and he snatched it up. "Grace, why is this with you?" I stiffened, mentally kicking myself for not hiding it better. Earlier that afternoon, Nia had been rummaging through my things and broke the small bell off the bracelet, so I had just finished repairing it. But this bracelet was the betrothal token between him and me. I had reclaimed it from the Vance family earlier. Julian stared at me, his expression turning strange. "Wait, this should be with my mother. Why do you have it?" I scrambled to find a logical excuse, but he suddenly let out a laugh, providing his own answer. "I get it. My mother must have told you to bring it to me, right?" He placed the bracelet back into my luggage, his tone perfectly natural. "Just keep it. We're getting married soon anyway. What's mine is yours. You might as well hold on to it all." I let out a soft breath of relief, but my hand remained firmly on my luggage. Julian furrowed his brow. "What? Still mad? Look, Naya was wrong, but she's just a child. Don't overreact. Do you have any idea how worried Sarah was when you disappeared? She went out alone tonight to look for you, and fell, scraping her knee. She's stuck in bed right now. It's strange. Nia is usually such a good girl. Why is it that every time you're around, something happens?" He was about to continue, but the moment he caught my gaze, the words seemed to choke in his throat. I suddenly burst out laughing. "You know, this afternoon your daughter went through my things. I told her to get lost. But your Sarah told me I had no right to kick her out. She even said that even if I married you, I could never win against her." I slowly watched his face, observing as his expression gradually crumbled. "What do you mean, my daughter? She's just my goddaughter." I ignored his protest and kept going. "You always use the excuse of looking after a widow and her child to get close to her. But think about it. If her husband knew how you were looking after his wife, would he even be able to keep his coffin lid closed?" I spoke calmly, but my words were like a sharp blade, tearing through the hypocritical facade Julian had built for himself. His face went pale, and he staggered back. After a long silence, he struggled to speak. "If you don't want to come home, then stay here and think things over. I'll come back for you in a few days." He turned and fled like a man escaping for his life, looking utterly pathetic. I never wanted to hurt you. I'm filing the marriage application tomorrow. I heard his stumbling footsteps fade away and calmly closed the door. It was ridiculous. It was as if, in his eyes, agreeing to marry me was some grand favor, like I should be grateful to him for the rest of my life. The next day, I went to see my teacher to pick up my train ticket. Fearing I wouldn't be able to get a seat, he had pulled some strings early on to secure one for me. He even contacted some acquaintances in the Northwest, asking them to look out for me. I had lunch with him, and in the afternoon, I went to the market to buy some local specialties to bring as gifts for my college roommates. That night, I went to bed very early. I thought I would toss and turn all night, feeling regret or overthinking, but surprisingly, I fell asleep almost instantly. The following morning, I handed the letter I had written to the guest house receptionist and asked them to deliver it. Then I checked out, grabbed my luggage, and headed straight to the train station. After 2 days of swaying on a bumpy train, where I could only catch fitful bits of sleep, I finally arrived at the campus. Only then did I truly breathe a sigh of relief. Once the enrollment procedures were finished, I quickly dived into the intense rhythm of my studies. In my past life, I never had the chance to step through a university gate, so I cherished this opportunity immensely. Aside from eating and sleeping, I spent every waking moment in the classroom or the library. The first letter from Julian Vance arrived 3 months after I started school. I wasn't surprised he found me. A month prior, I had received a letter from my teacher saying Julian had come looking for him and discovered I was in the Northwest. In his letter, he wrote that he didn't agree to call off the engagement. In my heart, you are always my wife. There's truly nothing between Sarah and me. I know you don't like her, so I told her to leave. We won't see each other again. I will definitely wait for you to come back. At the end of the letter, he included $100 in cash. I folded the letter and put it away. I didn't reply, and I didn't touch the money. The workload at the university was heavy. I had planned to find a part-time job. Even though my grades were at the top of the class and I received a scholarship, my monthly living expenses were still a struggle. My teacher found out and gave me a scolding, after which he began sending me $50 every month. In his letters, he emphasized that this was just a loan. At the end of the letter, my teacher added a rare touch of humor, writing, "Don't worry, my wife knows about this and she's fully on board." But for some reason, tears suddenly began to fall. In my previous life, no matter how much suffering I endured, I felt rage, resentment, and regret, but I never shed a single tear. I thought I would be the same in this life. But in this moment, the dam broke, and my tears were unstoppable. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed so hard that my roommates panicked, rushing over to comfort and console me. After that cry, I became even more determined. Julian Vance's letters continued to arrive regularly, each with $100 in cash. In his letters, he wrote, "I know you definitely don't want to come back yet, but wait for me. This new year, I'm coming to the Northwest to spend the holidays with you." But Julian never came. His letters also abruptly stopped. It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth from my teacher. He wrote, "This whole situation turned into quite a scandal. Word is, he initially filed for a transfer to be near you, but someone reported him for indecent conduct. Since you had already left and there was no victim to testify, the official charges were dropped. However, that woman lost her job. Left with no other choice, he had to marry her." At the end of the letter, my teacher wrote sincerely, "I am truly happy for you. You are a lucky woman." I knew that in this life, I really was lucky. Lucky to be reborn. Lucky to have returned before filling out my college applications. Lucky to have escaped the swamp of my past life. Much later, I received one final letter from him. His first words were an apology. He went on to write, "The person who reported me was actually Sarah Miller. She knew I had applied for a transfer and begged me to stay, but I refused. So she took a gamble, and she won. She got her marriage." Julian wrote that only much later did he understand the meaning of the red X marks on the calendar in my living room. Before, he had always thought those were the days I was counting down until our wedding. I gave a faint, cold smile. Then I burned every single one of his letters. As for the money Julian had sent me, I sent the entire amount back to my teacher, asking him to give it to people who needed it more than I did. 2 years later, before I had even graduated, I joined the nation's Project 201 construction team. I dedicated the rest of my life to my country, never caring if or when I would ever return. Julian's perspective. That day at the guest house, after hearing Grace's words, I was both enraged and horrified. When I got home, I locked myself in my room for 3 days. I knew I had truly messed up. My mistake was that while waiting for Grace to grow up, I let my heart waver. My mistake was that through all those times helping Sarah Miller, I slowly forgot I already had a fiancé. Sarah's gentle, submissive nature and Nia's lively innocence had blurred my vision, making me lose sight of my boundaries. By the time I snapped out of it, I realized I had made a catastrophic error. I decided to go find Grace, but when I got to the guest house, it was too late. She was gone. She had left me behind. I asked so many people, but no one knew where she went. It wasn't until I tracked down her teacher that I found out she had gone all the way to the northwest. My world felt like it was collapsing. I remembered the silver bracelet that shouldn't have been in her luggage. I rushed back to our hometown, only to find out she had already canceled the engagement. That morning, I returned like a ghost to the apartment where we had lived together for 3 years. That night, I drank heavily, and Sarah Miller sneaked into my room. Afterward, she discovered my transfer application and immediately caused a scene. Then she lost her job, and her family came over to raise hell. In the end, I had no choice but to marry her. After the wedding, my friends gradually distanced themselves from me. I wrote letters to Grace, but she never replied. It was as if the moment she left that place, she vanished from my life forever. After marrying Sarah, she kept me on a very tight leash. If even the slightest thing went wrong, she would start a massive fight. My parents disliked her and were always comparing her to Grace. Slowly, she became frantic and unstable. I had many opportunities for promotion, but she ruined them every single time. Whenever I planned a transfer, she would scream, "You want to leave me, don't you? You want to go find that bitch, don't you?" Every time that happened, I could only manage a bare smile, because I knew that now, Grace would find even the sight of me disgusting. I was nothing to her. As time passed, I watched my friends move up the ranks, while I remained stuck in the same position. From then on, Sarah started blaming me. She said I was useless, that she had lost her whole life just because she married the wrong man. She wanted more children, but couldn't conceive. In the end, we only had Nia. Nia grew up, got married, and had children, but she didn't get a good husband either. The man was abusive, unfaithful, and a gambling addict. Every day, Sarah would cry over her daughter, but when Nia wanted a divorce, Sarah opposed it with her life. Every time Nia fought with her husband, Sarah would turn her anger on me. "It's all because you're useless. If you had power and a high position, my daughter wouldn't be in this state." But Nia resented me too, saying it was my lack of status that left her with no one to lean on. I don't know when my life turned into this. Sometimes I sit alone in the pitch-black house, wondering about a different reality. If only back then, I had been a little more steadfast. If only back then, I hadn't let my heart waver. Perhaps now, the girl I waited so many years for would still be by my side. But there is no such thing as if only, in this world. Later, Nia wanted a divorce but couldn't get one. She tried to run away but was caught and brought back, resulting in her being beaten within an inch of her life by her husband. I was old and couldn't help her. In the end, Nia committed suicide, leaving behind a child who was only 6 years old. I never imagined that in my twilight years, having lost our daughter, we would have to raise a 6-year-old. Looking at the child before me, I suddenly remembered that time long ago. It seemed as though there was once a youthful presence by my side, a girl who had given me her entire heart and soul. But I constantly find myself wondering, if I hadn't fallen for Sarah Miller back then, if I had stayed firm and held on to Grace, if we had gotten married back then, perhaps the ending would have been different. But exactly when I lost her, I can no longer remember. Looking back at my entire life, it has truly been utterly meaningless.